Question 1. Process analysis reveals a client in Arkansas is seeking to purchase a home and expresses a strong preference for the lowest possible initial monthly mortgage payment. They are not concerned about long-term interest costs at this stage. As a licensed real estate professional in Arkansas, what is the most ethically and legally sound approach to advising this client on their mortgage options? Option A. Suggest an interest-only mortgage, highlighting the benefit of no principal repayment initially, which will result in the lowest possible payment for the first several years. Option B. Thoroughly explain the characteristics of fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages, detailing the payment structures, risks, and long-term implications of each, and then guide the client to consider their financial stability and risk tolerance to make an informed choice. Option C. Present only the mortgage product with the absolute lowest advertised initial monthly payment, without delving into the specifics of different mortgage types or their long-term consequences. Option D. Recommend an adjustable rate mortgage, emphasizing its lower initial interest rate and monthly payment, as this directly addresses the client's stated primary concern. The correct answer is B. Thoroughly explain the characteristics of fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages, detailing the payment structures, risks, and long-term implications of each, and then guide the client to consider their financial stability and risk tolerance to make an informed choice. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee in Arkansas to balance the client's immediate financial concerns with the long-term implications of mortgage product selection. The client's desire for lower initial payments, while understandable, could lead to future financial instability if not properly understood and managed. A licensee must act in the client's best interest, which includes providing accurate information and guiding them towards a decision that aligns with their financial capacity and risk tolerance, not just their immediate preference. This requires a deep understanding of different mortgage types and their potential impacts, as mandated by Arkansas real estate licensing laws, which emphasize fiduciary duties and competent representation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly explaining the fundamental differences between fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages, focusing on how each impacts monthly payments, overall interest paid, and long-term affordability. This includes detailing the predictability of fixed-rate mortgages versus the potential for payment fluctuations in adjustable-rate mortgages, and the principal repayment structure of interest-only loans. The licensee should then guide the client to consider their financial stability, risk tolerance, and long-term homeownership goals to make an informed decision. This approach directly aligns with the Arkansas real estate license law, which requires licensees to exercise reasonable care and diligence, and to act as a fiduciary, meaning they must prioritize the client's interests and provide advice that is in their best financial interest, not just what is easiest or cheapest initially. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending an adjustable rate mortgage solely based on the client's desire for lower initial payments, without a comprehensive discussion of the risks associated with potential future payment increases, is professionally negligent. This fails to uphold the fiduciary duty to inform the client of all material facts and potential consequences, potentially leading to a loan the client cannot afford. Similarly, suggesting an interest-only mortgage without fully explaining that no principal is being paid down, and that the principal balance will remain constant or even increase if not managed, is a failure to provide adequate disclosure. This could result in the client not building equity as expected and facing a large balloon payment or a significantly higher payment later. Presenting only the lowest initial payment option without detailing the trade-offs of each mortgage type, or pushing a specific product without understanding the client's financial situation and risk tolerance, also constitutes a failure to act in the client's best interest and a violation of the duty of care required by Arkansas law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first actively listening to and understanding the client's stated needs and concerns. Then, they must educate the client comprehensively on all relevant options, highlighting both the benefits and drawbacks of each. This education should be tailored to the client's apparent financial literacy and risk tolerance. The licensee's role is to facilitate an informed decision, not to make the decision for the client. This involves asking probing questions about the client's financial stability, future income expectations, and comfort level with payment uncertainty. The ultimate goal is to ensure the client selects a mortgage product that is suitable for their long-term financial well-being and homeownership aspirations, consistent with their fiduciary obligations under Arkansas law. Question 2. Investigation of a proposed lease agreement for a property in Little Rock, Arkansas, reveals clauses that suggest a potential purchase option for the tenant at the end of the lease term. The real estate licensee representing the tenant is unsure if this agreement should be treated as a standard residential lease or a lease-to-own agreement under Arkansas law. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensee? Option A. Thoroughly review the lease agreement to identify all terms and conditions. Accurately classify it as either a standard residential lease or a lease-to-own agreement, and provide the tenant with a detailed explanation of their rights and obligations under the specific type of agreement, recommending legal counsel if necessary. Option B. Inform the tenant that lease-to-own agreements are complex and outside the scope of a real estate licensee's expertise, and advise them to find their own legal representation without offering any initial assessment of the document. Option C. Assume the agreement is a standard residential lease, as this is the most common type of lease, and proceed with the transaction without further investigation into the purchase option clauses. Option D. Advise the tenant that the purchase option is a minor detail and that they should sign the lease as presented, as the primary focus is securing the rental property. The correct answer is A. Thoroughly review the lease agreement to identify all terms and conditions, accurately classify it as either a standard residential lease or a lease-to-own agreement, and provide the tenant with a detailed explanation of their rights and obligations under the specific type of agreement, recommending legal counsel if necessary. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee in Arkansas to navigate the nuances of lease agreements, specifically distinguishing between a standard residential lease and a lease-to-own agreement, while also ensuring compliance with Arkansas real estate law and ethical obligations to clients. Misinterpreting the nature of the agreement or failing to clearly communicate its terms can lead to significant legal and financial repercussions for both the client and the licensee. The licensee must demonstrate a thorough understanding of contract law as it applies to real estate transactions in Arkansas and uphold their fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest. The best professional approach involves a meticulous review of the proposed agreement to accurately identify its classification, and then providing a clear, comprehensive explanation to the client. This includes detailing the specific rights and obligations under an Arkansas residential lease, as well as the unique provisions and potential outcomes associated with a lease-to-own structure, such as purchase options, deadlines, and how rent credits, if any, are applied. The licensee must ensure the client fully comprehends the implications of signing a lease-to-own agreement, including the risks and benefits, before proceeding. This aligns with Arkansas real estate regulations that mandate licensees to act with honesty, integrity, and competence, and to disclose all material facts. Furthermore, ethical guidelines require licensees to provide competent service and to avoid misrepresentation or concealment of material facts. An incorrect approach would be to assume the agreement is a standard residential lease without a thorough review, thereby failing to inform the client about the lease-to-own provisions. This constitutes a failure to disclose material facts and a lack of competence, violating Arkansas real estate law and ethical standards. Another incorrect approach would be to provide a superficial explanation of the lease-to-own terms, leaving the client with a misunderstanding of their rights and obligations. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and could be construed as misrepresentation, as the client is not fully informed. Finally, advising the client to sign the agreement without ensuring their complete understanding of the lease-to-own structure, especially if the licensee themselves does not fully grasp its complexities, is a severe ethical and legal failing. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and potentially places the client in a disadvantageous position, violating the licensee's fiduciary duty. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes client education and full disclosure. This involves 1. Thoroughly reviewing all documentation to understand its legal classification and implications under Arkansas law. 2. Identifying any unique clauses or terms that deviate from standard agreements. 3. Clearly and comprehensively explaining these terms to the client, using plain language and addressing all potential questions. 4. Recommending that the client seek independent legal counsel for complex agreements, especially those involving significant financial commitments or unique structures like lease-to-own. 5. Documenting all client communications and advice provided. Question 3. Comparative studies suggest that effective real estate advertising in Arkansas hinges on accuracy and transparency. A broker is listing a rural property and is informed by the seller that a well has been recently drilled. The broker has not personally inspected the well or received any documentation confirming its functionality. Which of the following advertising approaches best adheres to Arkansas real estate law and ethical standards? Option A. Advertising the property with a newly drilled well and assuming the buyer will conduct their own due diligence regarding its functionality. Option B. Advertising the property as having a newly drilled, fully functional well based on the seller's verbal assurance. Option C. Advertising the property with a newly drilled well and stating that the seller guarantees its functionality. Option D. Advertising the property with a note stating well recently drilled, functionality to be confirmed by buyer, or omitting mention of the well until its operational status is verified. Correct answer is D. Advertising the property with a note stating well recently drilled, functionality to be confirmed by buyer, or omitting mention of the well until its operational status is verified. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate broker in Arkansas to navigate the ethical and legal boundaries of advertising property listings. The core issue is ensuring that advertising is truthful, not misleading, and complies with Arkansas real estate license law and regulations, specifically concerning the representation of property features and the disclosure of material facts. Misrepresenting property details can lead to significant legal repercussions, disciplinary action by the Arkansas Real Estate Commission, AREC, and damage to the broker's reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves accurately representing the property's condition and features in all advertising materials. This means confirming the existence and functionality of advertised amenities, such as a functioning well, before including them in marketing. This approach aligns with Arkansas Code Annotated Section 17-42-304, which prohibits fraudulent or dishonest dealings and misleading advertising. It also upholds the ethical duty of a licensee to be competent and honest, ensuring that potential buyers receive accurate information upon which to base their decisions. Transparency about the well's status, even if it requires further investigation, is paramount. Incorrect approach is analysis. Advertising the property with a newly drilled well, when the broker has not verified its functionality or even its existence, is a direct violation of Arkansas real estate license law. This constitutes misleading advertising, as it presents a potentially false positive attribute of the property to prospective buyers. Failing to disclose that the well's functionality is unconfirmed or that it is not currently operational is also a failure to disclose a material fact, which could impact a buyer's decision and potentially lead to a breach of contract or legal action. Similarly, advertising the well as fully functional without direct confirmation is a misrepresentation. Relying solely on the seller's word without independent verification, especially when it involves a critical utility like a water source, is professionally negligent and ethically questionable under Arkansas regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and verification-based approach to advertising. Before marketing a property, brokers must diligently confirm all advertised features, especially those that are significant selling points or essential utilities. If information is uncertain, it should be clearly stated as such in the advertising, or the feature should be omitted until verified. This involves direct communication with the seller, requesting documentation, and where appropriate, recommending or facilitating professional inspections. A commitment to accuracy and transparency protects both the consumer and the licensee. Question 4. The investigation demonstrates that a real estate broker in Arkansas, while representing a buyer, receives conflicting information regarding the zoning status of a property. The seller's agent claims the property is zoned for commercial use, but a quick online search by the buyer's broker reveals a different zoning classification that appears to restrict commercial development. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the Arkansas real estate broker? Option A. Advise the buyer that the online search is likely incorrect and that they should rely on the seller's agent's verbal assurance regarding the commercial zoning. Option B. Proceed with the transaction based on the seller's agent's representation, assuming they have accurate information, and inform the buyer that the zoning might need to be clarified later. Option C. Inform the buyer of the discrepancy, but downplay its significance, suggesting that zoning issues are often overlooked and unlikely to cause problems for a commercial buyer. Option D. Immediately contact the local Arkansas Planning and Zoning Department to obtain official confirmation of the property's zoning classification and any associated restrictions before advising the buyer further. The correct answer is D. Immediately contact the local Arkansas Planning and Zoning Department to obtain official confirmation of the property's zoning classification and any associated restrictions before advising the buyer further. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a real estate broker in Arkansas is presented with conflicting information regarding a property's zoning, which directly impacts its potential use and marketability. This situation is professionally challenging because the broker has a fiduciary duty to their client to provide accurate and complete information, and a failure to do so can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions. The broker must navigate the complexities of due diligence and the potential for misrepresentation. The best professional approach involves proactively verifying the zoning information through official channels. This means contacting the relevant local government planning or zoning department in Arkansas to obtain official documentation or confirmation of the property's current zoning classification and any applicable restrictions or variances. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Arkansas Real Estate License Act, which mandates that licensees act with honesty and integrity and exercise reasonable care and diligence. Specifically, the Act requires brokers to disclose all material facts known or reasonably discoverable that affect the property's value or desirability. Relying on unofficial or outdated information without independent verification would be a breach of this duty. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the seller's verbal assurance or a casually obtained document without independent verification. This is professionally unacceptable because it places undue trust in potentially inaccurate or incomplete information, failing to meet the standard of reasonable care and diligence required by Arkansas law. The broker would be failing to conduct proper due diligence, potentially leading to a misrepresentation to the buyer. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the transaction without disclosing the potential zoning discrepancy to the buyer, assuming it will be resolved later or that the buyer will discover it. This is ethically and legally flawed as it violates the duty to disclose material facts. Arkansas law requires prompt disclosure of any known or discoverable material facts that could influence a buyer's decision. Withholding this information, even if not intentionally deceptive, constitutes a failure to act in the client's best interest and can be construed as misrepresentation. A further incorrect approach would be to dismiss the discrepancy as minor and proceed based on the assumption that the property's intended use is unlikely to be challenged. This demonstrates a lack of professional judgment and a disregard for the potential legal ramifications of zoning violations. The broker's role is to present facts, not to make assumptions about future enforcement or the buyer's tolerance for risk. The professional reasoning framework for such situations involves a commitment to thorough due diligence, transparency, and adherence to legal and ethical standards. And presented with conflicting information, a broker should always prioritize verification through official sources. Any material discrepancy should be promptly disclosed to the client, and the broker should advise the client on the implications of the information and recommend seeking expert advice if necessary, e.g., from an attorney or zoning consultant. The ultimate goal is to ensure the client makes an informed decision based on accurate and complete information. Question 5. When assisting a client in Arkansas who is selling a typical single-family home in a suburban neighborhood and the primary goal is to establish a competitive listing price, which property valuation method should a licensed real estate professional prioritize and why? Option A, comparative market analysis. Option B, income approach. Option C, cost approach. Option D, a combination of all three methods, equally without consideration for property type. Correct answer is A, comparative market analysis. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because a real estate licensee in Arkansas must provide accurate and defensible property valuations to clients, adhering to both legal requirements and ethical standards. Misrepresenting valuation methods or their applicability can lead to client dissatisfaction, legal disputes, and disciplinary action by the Arkansas Real Estate Commission. The licensee must select the most appropriate valuation method based on the property type and available data, ensuring transparency and competence. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is the comparative market analysis. This method is best suited for residential properties, which are common in Arkansas. As it relies on the principle of substitution, a buyer will not pay more for property than they would for a similar property with similar amenities. Arkansas real estate licensees are expected to be proficient in CMA, as it is a fundamental tool for estimating market value for most residential transactions. The Arkansas Real Estate Commission's regulations implicitly support the use of CMA for residential properties by requiring licensees to act competently and in the best interest of their clients, which includes providing a reasonable estimate of market value. This approach is directly aligned with the practical realities of the Arkansas residential real estate market. Using the income approach would be inappropriate and potentially misleading for a single-family residence. This method is primarily designed for income-producing properties like apartment buildings or commercial spaces, where rental income is the primary driver of value. Applying it to a home where the owner occupies the property ignores the primary market forces at play and would not reflect what a typical buyer would pay. This demonstrates a lack of competence and could violate the duty to represent the client accurately. The cost approach, while a valid valuation method, is generally less reliable for older residential properties. It estimates value based on the cost to replace or reproduce the property, minus depreciation. For older homes in Arkansas, accurately estimating accrued depreciation can be highly subjective and difficult, leading to a less precise valuation compared to the CMA. Furthermore, the cost to build a new home often does not reflect the current market value of an existing, older structure, especially if it has unique architectural features or requires significant modernization. Relying solely on this method without considering market comparables would be a failure to use the most relevant and reliable data available for a typical residential sale. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the client's needs and the specific property type. For residential properties in Arkansas, the initial and often primary consideration should be the comparative market analysis. If the property has unique characteristics or if market data is scarce, then considering the cost approach might be a secondary step, but always with an awareness of its limitations for older properties. The income approach should only be considered if the property is demonstrably income-producing. This layered approach ensures that the valuation is grounded in the most relevant market data and principles, fulfilling the licensee's fiduciary duties. Question 6. The efficiency study reveals that a tenant in a property managed in Little Rock, Arkansas, is consistently violating a specific clause in their lease agreement regarding the proper disposal of waste, leading to unsanitary conditions and potential pest issues. As the property manager, what is the most appropriate course of action to address this situation? Option A. Immediately begin the eviction process against the tenant, as the unsanitary conditions pose a risk to the property. Option B. Review the lease agreement for specific clauses related to waste disposal and tenant responsibilities. Consult the Arkansas Landlord and Tenant Act for relevant provisions, and then issue a formal written notice to the tenant detailing the lease violations and required corrective actions, while also informing the owner. Option C. Issue a verbal warning to the tenant about the waste disposal issue and hope they correct their behavior without further documentation. Option D. Advise the owner to simply tolerate the tenant's behavior, as addressing it might lead to tenant complaints and potential vacancy. The correct answer is B. Review the lease agreement for specific clauses related to waste disposal and tenant responsibilities. Consult the Arkansas Landlord and Tenant Act for relevant provisions, and then issue a formal written notice to the tenant detailing the lease violations and required corrective actions, while also informing the owner. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a property manager to balance the fiduciary duties owed to the property owner with the practical realities of tenant relations and lease obligations, all within the specific legal framework of Arkansas. The property manager must act in the owner's best interest while adhering to Arkansas law regarding landlord-tenant relationships and fair housing. Careful judgment is required to navigate potential conflicts and ensure compliance. The best approach involves a thorough review of the existing lease agreement and Arkansas law concerning lease violations and tenant rights. This means identifying specific clauses in the lease that address the tenant's actions and cross-referencing them with relevant sections of the Arkansas Landlord and Tenant Act. The property manager should then communicate with the tenant in writing, clearly outlining the lease violations and the required corrective actions, while also informing the owner of the situation and the proposed course of action. This approach is correct because it prioritizes adherence to contractual obligations, the lease, and statutory requirements, Arkansas law, ensuring a legally sound and documented process. It demonstrates due diligence and protects both the owner and the property manager from potential legal repercussions. An approach that involves immediately initiating eviction proceedings without first reviewing the lease or providing written notice to the tenant is incorrect. This bypasses the legally mandated notice periods and opportunities for the tenant to cure the violation, which is a violation of the Arkansas Landlord and Tenant Act. Such an action could lead to a wrongful eviction lawsuit. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the tenant's behavior, assuming it will resolve itself. This fails to uphold the property manager's duty to protect the owner's investment and maintain the property's condition as stipulated in the lease. It also neglects the owner's right to have their property managed effectively and in accordance with the lease terms. Finally, an approach that involves verbally warning the tenant without any written documentation or formal communication is also professionally unacceptable. While a verbal warning might be a preliminary step, it lacks the legal weight and evidence required to support future actions if the behavior continues. It does not create a clear record of the violation or the attempts to resolve it, making it difficult to prove compliance with legal notice requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the governing lease agreement and applicable state laws. This should be followed by a systematic process of documentation, communication, and adherence to established legal procedures. When faced with tenant issues, property managers should always consult the lease and Arkansas statutes, communicate clearly and in writing with all parties, and maintain thorough records of all interactions and actions taken. Question 7. Regulatory review indicates a property in rural Arkansas is primarily utilized for crop production and livestock farming, with a modest farmhouse on the premises. A real estate licensee is tasked with listing this property, which classification best aligns with Arkansas real estate regulations and professional practice for marketing and transacting this property. Option A, commercial property. Option B, residential property. Option C, agricultural property. Option D, industrial property. The correct answer is C, agricultural property. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee in Arkansas to accurately identify the primary classification of a property based on its intended use and the associated legal and regulatory considerations. Misclassifying a property can lead to significant legal and financial repercussions for both the client and the licensee, including potential violations of Arkansas real estate license law and ethical standards. The challenge lies in discerning the dominant characteristic of the property when multiple uses might be present or implied. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding of Arkansas real estate law and common industry practices for property classification. This means identifying the property's primary purpose and the associated regulations that govern its sale or lease. For property primarily used for cultivating crops and raising livestock, this classification as agricultural is paramount. Arkansas law, through its Real Estate Commission rules and statutes, recognizes distinct categories for real estate, and agricultural properties have specific considerations regarding zoning, environmental regulations, and disclosure requirements that differ from residential, commercial, or industrial properties. A licensee must prioritize this primary classification to ensure compliance and provide accurate advice. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to focus solely on the presence of a dwelling on the property, classifying it as residential. While a dwelling may exist, if its primary purpose and economic driver are agricultural activities, it falls under the agricultural classification. This overlooks the dominant use and the specific legal framework governing agricultural land sales in Arkansas. Another incorrect approach is to classify the property based on a secondary or potential future use, such as commercial development, without clear evidence or client intent. This can lead to misrepresentation and failure to adhere to the correct disclosure and marketing protocols for the property's actual current classification. Finally, classifying the property as industrial simply because some machinery or storage might be present, without it being the primary economic activity or intended use, is also a failure to accurately assess the property's core nature and regulatory context in Arkansas. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach property classification by first identifying the client's primary intent for the property, and then cross-referencing this with the physical characteristics in current use. They must be knowledgeable about the definitions and regulatory distinctions between residential, commercial, industrial, and agricultural properties as defined by Arkansas real estate license law and related statutes. When in doubt, consulting with experienced colleagues, legal counsel, or relevant local authorities is a prudent step to ensure accurate classification and compliance. Question 8. Consider a scenario where a real estate broker in Arkansas is representing a client looking to sell a large parcel of land on the outskirts of a growing city. A developer proposes to purchase the land for a significant sum, intending to build a large commercial complex that could bring substantial new jobs, but also potentially increase traffic congestion and strain local infrastructure. What is the most responsible course of action for the Arkansas real estate broker to advise their client on regarding the potential economic impacts of this development on the surrounding real estate market? Option A. Advise the client to conduct an independent economic impact study of the proposed development and present a comprehensive analysis of both potential benefits and drawbacks to the client, enabling an informed decision. Option B. Focus solely on negotiating the highest possible sale price for the client, assuming that any economic impacts, positive or negative, are beyond the scope of the broker's responsibility. Option C. Encourage the client to accept the offer immediately, emphasizing the high sale price and the potential for rapid economic growth without delving into potential negative consequences. Option D. Advise the client to reject the offer outright, citing potential traffic and infrastructure issues, without thoroughly investigating the full economic implications for the property's value or the broader market. The correct answer is A. Advise the client to conduct an independent economic impact study of the proposed development and present a comprehensive analysis of both potential benefits and drawbacks to the client, enabling an informed decision. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker in Arkansas to balance the immediate financial interests of their client with the broader, long-term economic health of the local market. Misjudging the impact of a proposed development can lead to significant financial losses for the client and damage the broker's reputation and the community's stability. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests ethically and legally. The best approach involves conducting a thorough, objective analysis of the proposed development's potential economic impact on the surrounding Arkansas real estate market. This includes evaluating factors such as job creation, infrastructure strain, potential for increased property values, both positive and negative, and the impact on existing businesses and residential areas. The broker should then present this comprehensive, data-driven assessment to the client, outlining both the potential benefits and drawbacks. This aligns with the Arkansas Real Estate License Law and Commission rules, which mandate that licensees act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interest of their clients, while also upholding professional standards that consider market integrity. Providing a balanced perspective allows the client to make an informed decision based on a realistic understanding of the market dynamics. An approach that solely focuses on maximizing the immediate sale price without considering the long-term economic consequences for the neighborhood is professionally unacceptable. This fails to uphold the broker's fiduciary duty to the client by not providing a complete picture of potential risks and benefits. It also risks violating ethical standards by potentially contributing to market instability or negative externalities that could harm other property owners and the community. Furthermore, it neglects the broader responsibility of real estate professionals to contribute to a healthy and sustainable market. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the client's concerns about potential negative impacts without proper investigation. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to adequately represent the client's interests. A responsible broker must investigate all material aspects of a transaction, including potential market impacts, and provide informed advice. Finally, An approach that prioritizes personal gain, such as securing a quick commission by downplaying potential negative market effects, is unethical and a violation of the broker's duty of loyalty and good faith to the client. This behavior erodes trust and undermines the integrity of the real estate profession in Arkansas. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's objectives, followed by a thorough investigation of all relevant factors, including market conditions and potential impacts. This involves gathering data, consulting with relevant experts if necessary, and presenting a balanced, objective analysis to the client. Ethical considerations and regulatory compliance should be paramount throughout the process, ensuring that advice is both legally sound and professionally responsible. Question 9. Upon reviewing recent market reports for the Little Rock metropolitan area, a real estate broker in Arkansas observes a significant increase in new housing starts coupled with a noticeable slowdown in the rate of home sales over the past quarter. A client, who is considering selling their home, expresses concern that the market is shifting towards a buyer's market and that they might not achieve their desired sale price. How should the broker best advise this client? Option A. Suggest that the client ignore the recent sales slowdown and focus on the historical appreciation rates of homes in the area over the last decade to justify their current asking price. Option B. Advise the client to immediately lower their asking price significantly to attract buyers, without first analyzing current market conditions or the property's specific appeal. Option C. Reassure the client that the market will likely rebound quickly and that they should wait to sell, focusing on anecdotal evidence of strong demand from a few recent open houses. Option D. Present the client with objective data on inventory levels, absorption rates, and recent comparable sales in their specific neighborhood, explaining how these indicators suggest a potential shift in the market cycle and its implications for their sales strategy. The correct answer is D. Present the client with objective data on inventory levels, absorption rates, and recent comparable sales in their specific neighborhood, explaining how these indicators suggest a potential shift in the market cycle and its implications for their sales strategy. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker in Arkansas to navigate the complexities of economic cycles and their impact on property values and client expectations. The broker must balance providing accurate market insights with managing client emotions and potential financial risks, all while adhering to Arkansas real estate licensing laws and ethical obligations. Misinterpreting or miscommunicating market trends can lead to poor investment decisions for clients, damage the broker's reputation, and potentially result in legal or disciplinary action. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough analysis of current and historical real estate data specific to the relevant Arkansas market. This includes examining factors like inventory levels, absorption rates, interest rate trends, local economic development, and demographic shifts. The broker should then present this data objectively to the client, explaining how these factors contribute to the current market cycle, e.g., buyer's market, seller's market, balanced market, and its potential implications for property values and transaction timelines. This approach aligns with the Arkansas Real Estate License Law, which mandates that licensees act with honesty and integrity and provide competent service, including accurate market information. Ethical considerations also demand that brokers act in their clients' best interests, which includes providing realistic expectations based on market realities. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's concerns about a potential market downturn without providing any supporting data or analysis. This fails to acknowledge the client's perspective and neglects the broker's duty to provide informed advice. It can be perceived as unprofessional and dismissive, potentially violating the obligation to act with reasonable care and diligence. Another incorrect approach is to overemphasize speculative future price increases based on anecdotal evidence or personal optimism, without grounding the advice in objective market data. This can lead to unrealistic client expectations and potentially encourage clients to make ill-advised investment decisions, which could be a violation of the duty of honesty and fair dealing. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on past market performance without considering current economic indicators or the specific characteristics of the local Arkansas market. Real estate cycles are dynamic, and relying on outdated information can lead to inaccurate projections and poor strategic advice, failing to meet the standard of competent service. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach market analysis by first identifying the relevant geographic area and then gathering comprehensive data on local economic conditions, demographic trends, and real estate-specific metrics. This data should be analyzed to determine the current phase of the real estate cycle. The next step is to communicate these findings to the client in a clear, objective, and understandable manner, explaining the implications for their specific goals. This communication should be a dialogue, allowing the client to ask questions and express concerns, which the broker should address with factual information and professional guidance. The broker must always prioritize the client's best interests, acting with honesty, integrity, and competence, as mandated by Arkansas real estate regulations. Question 10. When evaluating their license renewal for the upcoming period, a real estate broker licensed in Arkansas needs to determine if they have met the continuing education requirements. The broker completed the following courses during the past 2 years: a 6-hour course on agency law ARIC approved, a 4-hour course on contract law ARIC approved, a 6-hour course on fair housing ARIC approved, and a 2-hour workshop on social media marketing for real estate not ARIC approved and not covering a mandated core topic. How many ARIC approved continuing education hours has the broker successfully completed for this renewal cycle? Option A, 18 hours. Option B, 16 hours. Option C, 14 hours. Option D, 12 hours. The correct answer is B, 16 hours. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker in Arkansas to accurately calculate continuing education hours while navigating potential ambiguities in course content and the specific renewal period. Miscalculating CE can lead to license suspension or revocation, impacting the broker's livelihood and client trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the Arkansas Real Estate Commission (ARIC) regulations. The best approach involves meticulously tracking all completed CE courses and their corresponding credit hours, ensuring each course is approved by the ARIC and directly relates to the required topics for license renewal. This broker should sum the hours from the approved courses, confirming they meet or exceed the 16-hour requirement for the current renewal period. For example, if the broker completed a 6-hour course on agency law, a 4-hour course on contracts, and a 6-hour course on fair housing, the total is /6 plus 4 plus 6 equals 16 hours. This method directly addresses the ARIC mandate for 16 hours of approved CE every 2 years, with at least 1 hour in each of the specified core topics. An incorrect approach would be to assume that any real estate-related course counts towards the requirement. For instance, a broker attending a 2-hour seminar on advanced marketing techniques that is not specifically approved by the ARIC and does not cover a mandated core topic would not fulfill the CE obligation. This fails to adhere to the ARIC requirement for approved courses and specific topic coverage. Another incorrect approach is to only count hours from courses completed within the immediate preceding year, ignoring courses completed in the first year of the 2-year renewal cycle. The ARIC mandates 16 hours over the entire 2-year period. A broker who completes 8 hours in the first year and another 8 hours in the second year has met the requirement, even if they only consider the second year's completion. A further incorrect approach is to simply estimate the total hours based on the number of courses taken without verifying the specific credit hours awarded by the ARIC for each course. Some courses might be advertised with a certain duration, but receive fewer CE credits from the Commission. This lack of precise calculation and verification can lead to an underestimation of required hours. Professionals should adopt a proactive and meticulous approach to CE. This involves maintaining a detailed log of all completed CE courses, including the course title, provider, date of completion, and the number of CE hours awarded by the ARIC. Before enrolling in a course, brokers should verify its approval status with the ARIC and confirm it covers one of the mandated core topics. During the renewal process, a thorough review of this log against the ARIC requirements ensures full compliance and avoids potential penalties. Question 11. The analysis reveals that Sarah, an Arkansas licensed real estate broker, has been exclusively representing a seller in listing their property. During an open house, she meets John, a prospective buyer who expresses strong interest in the property. John indicates he does not have his own buyer's agent and asks Sarah for her assistance in making an offer and navigating the purchase process. Sarah believes she can effectively represent both the seller and John in this transaction, as she feels their interests are not in direct conflict at this stage. Under Arkansas law, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for Sarah to take immediately? Option A. Sarah should advise John to find his own buyer's agent and withdraw from representing him to avoid any perceived conflict of interest, even though she believes she can manage it. Option B. Sarah must immediately disclose to both the seller and John that she is in a potential dual agency situation and obtain their informed written consent before proceeding with any further actions on behalf of John, including preparing an offer. Option C. Sarah can act as a transactional broker for John without formal disclosure to the seller, as her role would be limited to facilitating the paperwork for his offer. Option D. Sarah can proceed to assist John with his offer, as her primary duty is to facilitate the transaction, and she can disclose the dual agency later once an offer is accepted. The correct answer is B. Sarah must immediately disclose to both the seller and John that she is in a potential dual agency situation and obtain their informed written consent before proceeding with any further actions on behalf of John, including preparing an offer. Explanation. The analysis reveals a common yet complex situation in real estate brokerage, where a licensee finds themselves representing parties with potentially conflicting interests. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a deep understanding of agency law and ethical obligations under Arkansas law to navigate without violating fiduciary duties or the Arkansas real estate license law. The licensee must prioritize transparency and informed consent to avoid legal repercussions and maintain professional integrity. The best approach involves immediately disclosing the potential dual agency situation to both parties and obtaining their informed written consent before proceeding with any further actions that could be construed as representing both sides. This proactive disclosure, as outlined in Arkansas law regarding agency relationships, ensures that both the seller and the buyer are fully aware of the licensee's role and the potential for divided loyalties. Obtaining written consent is crucial, as it serves as evidence of the parties' understanding and agreement to the arrangement, thereby mitigating the risk of future disputes or claims of misrepresentation. This aligns with the ethical duty to act with honesty and good faith towards all parties involved in a transaction. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with representing both parties without full disclosure and written consent, hoping to manage the situation discreetly. This violates the Arkansas real estate license law's requirement for clear agency disclosure and the fiduciary duty owed to each client. Another incorrect approach is to unilaterally decide that one party's interests are more aligned with the brokerage's overall goals and prioritize them, effectively neglecting the duties owed to the other party. This constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty and can lead to disciplinary action by the Arkansas Real Estate Commission. Finally, attempting to represent both parties by acting as a transactional broker without clearly defining the limited duties owed to each party and without obtaining explicit consent for this limited role is also problematic. While transactional brokerage exists, it still requires clear communication and consent regarding the scope of representation, and failing to do so can still lead to accusations of misrepresentation or breach of duty. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest as early as possible. Upon identification, the immediate next step should be to consult the relevant sections of the Arkansas Real Estate License Law and Commission rules pertaining to agency disclosure and dual agency. The licensee must then communicate transparently with all parties involved, explaining the implications of the situation and the available agency options. Obtaining informed written consent for any agreed-upon agency relationship is paramount. If informed consent cannot be obtained from both parties, or if the licensee feels they cannot ethically represent both parties effectively, the professional course of action is to decline representation of one or both parties. Question 12. The control framework reveals that a real estate broker in Arkansas has been approached by a seller who wants to list their property. The seller is eager for the property to be widely marketed, but is also concerned about paying a commission if they happen to find a buyer through their own personal network before the broker's efforts yield a sale. Considering the Arkansas Real Estate License Act and common brokerage practices. Which of the following approaches best balances the seller's objectives with the broker's need for commission security? Option A. Propose an exclusive right to sell listing agreement, clearly explaining that a commission is earned regardless of who finds the buyer. Option B. Advise the seller to pursue an open listing agreement to maximize their ability to sell the property independently without commission obligations. Option C. Suggest a verbal agreement to list the property, allowing for flexibility in commission terms as the sale progresses. Option D. Recommend an exclusive agency listing agreement, highlighting that the seller can avoid a commission by finding the buyer themselves. Correct answer is A. Propose an exclusive right to sell listing agreement, clearly explaining that a commission is earned regardless of who finds the buyer. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate brokers in Arkansas, balancing a seller's desire for broad marketing with the broker's need for a secure commission. The broker must navigate the different types of listing agreements and their implications for commission entitlement, ensuring compliance with Arkansas real estate law and ethical obligations to the client. The challenge lies in advising the seller on the most suitable agreement that protects the broker's interests while still meeting the seller's marketing objectives. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves recommending an exclusive right to sell listing agreement. This agreement ensures the broker earns a commission regardless of who procures the buyer, including the seller themselves. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Arkansas Real Estate License Act, which permits such agreements and provides the broker with the most secure basis for earning their commission. Ethically, it demonstrates the broker's commitment to their marketing efforts and their right to compensation for those efforts, while still being transparent with the seller about the terms. Incorrect approach is analysis. Recommending an open listing agreement would be professionally unacceptable. This type of agreement allows the seller to list their property with multiple brokers and also sell it themselves without owing a commission to any broker. This significantly jeopardizes the broker's ability to earn a commission for their marketing efforts, potentially leading to disputes and a failure to uphold their fiduciary duty to secure compensation for services rendered. Suggesting an exclusive agency listing agreement, while better than an open listing, still presents a professional risk. Under an exclusive agency agreement, the broker earns a commission unless the seller procures the buyer themselves. While this offers some protection, it still leaves the broker vulnerable to the seller finding a buyer independently, thereby negating the broker's commission despite their marketing efforts. This can lead to dissatisfaction and potential ethical questions regarding the broker's diligence in securing their compensation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this situation by first understanding the seller's primary goals and concerns. Then, they should clearly explain the implications of each listing agreement type under Arkansas law, focusing on how each impacts commission entitlement and the broker's marketing strategy. The decision-making process should prioritize transparency, client education, and selecting the agreement that best balances the seller's needs with the broker's right to compensation for their services, as defined by Arkansas regulations. Question 13. Implementation of a seller financing agreement for a residential property in Arkansas is being considered by your client, a seller who wishes to expedite the sale. The potential buyer has expressed a preference for this arrangement. As a licensed real estate professional in Arkansas, what is the most prudent course of action to ensure the client's best interests are protected and all legal requirements are met? Option A. Thoroughly explain the potential benefits and risks of seller financing to the client, including the importance of understanding loan terms, default provisions, and the potential need for legal recourse, and strongly advise the client to consult with an independent attorney to review and draft all loan documentation. Option B. Agree to handle the drafting of all loan documents yourself, as you have experience with similar transactions, to ensure the process is efficient and cost-effective for the client. Option C. Proceed with drafting the seller financing agreement, as this is a common practice in real estate transactions and can expedite the closing process for your client. Option D. Advise the client that seller financing is too complex and risky for a typical residential sale and recommend they only consider conventional mortgage financing. The correct answer is A. Thoroughly explain the potential benefits and risks of seller financing to the client, including the importance of understanding loan terms, default provisions, and the potential need for legal recourse, and strongly advise the client to consult with an independent attorney to review and draft all loan documentation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate professionals in Arkansas, balancing the client's desire for a quick sale with the need to ensure the transaction is structured ethically and legally, particularly when unconventional financing like seller financing is involved. The challenge lies in advising the client on the most suitable financing option while adhering to Arkansas real estate licensing laws and ethical standards, ensuring the client's best interests are protected without misrepresenting the risks or benefits of any particular financing method. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves thoroughly educating the client about the implications of seller financing, including the potential benefits, flexibility, speed and risks, default, legal complexities, potential for disputes. This includes advising the client to seek independent legal counsel to review all loan documents and ensure compliance with Arkansas law, such as usury laws and disclosure requirements. This approach prioritizes informed consent and legal protection for the client, aligning with the Arkansas Real Estate Commission's mandate to protect the public and uphold professional standards. It ensures the client understands the terms, risks, and their rights and obligations, fostering a transparent and secure transaction. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending seller financing without a comprehensive discussion of its risks and without strongly advising independent legal review is professionally negligent. This fails to protect the client from potential legal entanglements or financial losses if the buyer defaults or if the loan terms are not properly structured according to Arkansas statutes. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss seller financing outright without exploring its potential benefits for the client, which could be a missed opportunity if it were a suitable and advantageous option. Furthermore, suggesting that the real estate licensee will draft the loan documents without being a licensed attorney in Arkansas constitutes the unauthorized practice of law, a serious ethical and legal violation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a client-centered approach that prioritizes education and risk mitigation. When considering financing options like seller financing, the process should involve 1. Understanding the client's financial goals and risk tolerance. 2. Clearly explaining the mechanics, advantages, and disadvantages of the proposed financing method. 3. Strongly recommending and facilitating the client's engagement with independent legal counsel to review all documentation and ensure compliance with Arkansas law. And 4. Documenting all advice and recommendations provided to the client. This systematic process ensures ethical conduct, legal compliance, and the protection of the client's interests. Question 14. To address the challenge of representing a seller in a competitive market in Arkansas, a real estate broker receives an offer that is below the asking price, but from a buyer who expresses strong interest. The broker believes they could potentially generate higher offers if they delay presenting this offer and encourage other agents to bring their buyers to an open house. What is the most appropriate course of action for the broker to take? Option A. Advise the buyer that the offer is too low and suggest they submit a significantly lower offer to test the seller's willingness to negotiate, while delaying presentation of the current offer. Option B. Withhold the current offer from the seller and focus all marketing efforts on generating interest for a future open house, hoping to secure a higher offer at that time. Option C. Promptly present the offer to the seller. Advise the seller on its terms and potential for negotiation, and continue to market the property to attract additional offers. Option D. Inform the buyer's agent that the offer is unlikely to be accepted and encourage them to withdraw it, while simultaneously contacting other agents to discourage them from showing the property until after the open house. The correct answer is C. Promptly present the offer to the seller, advise the seller on its terms and potential for negotiation, and continue to market the property to attract additional offers. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the broker must navigate the competing interests of a seller who wishes to maximize their profit and a buyer who seeks the best possible price, all while upholding their fiduciary duties and adhering to Arkansas real estate license law. The broker's role is not simply to facilitate a transaction, but to act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interests of their client, which in this case is the seller. Careful judgment is required to ensure transparency and avoid any actions that could be construed as misrepresentation or a breach of trust. The best professional practice involves diligently marketing the property to attract the widest pool of potential buyers, and secure the highest possible offer for the seller. This includes advising the seller on appropriate pricing strategies based on market conditions and comparable sales, and presenting all offers promptly and accurately. This approach aligns with the broker's fiduciary duty to the seller, as mandated by Arkansas real estate law, which requires them to act with loyalty, obedience, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable care. By seeking multiple offers, the broker maximizes the seller's opportunity to achieve their financial goals while acting ethically and within legal boundaries. An approach that involves discouraging other agents from showing the property or suggesting to potential buyers that they should submit offers below the listed price is ethically and regulatorily unsound. Discouraging showings directly violates the broker's duty to market the property effectively and could be seen as an attempt to limit competition, potentially harming the seller's ability to obtain the best price. Advising buyers to submit lower offers, especially when representing the seller, is a direct breach of the fiduciary duty owed to the seller and constitutes a misrepresentation of the broker's loyalty. This behavior could lead to disciplinary action by the Arkansas Real Estate Commission, including license suspension or revocation, and potential civil liability. Another unacceptable approach is to accept an offer without presenting it to the seller or to misrepresent the terms of an offer to the seller. This directly violates the duty of disclosure and honesty. The broker must present all offers, regardless of their perceived merit, and accurately convey all terms and conditions. Failure to do so undermines the seller's right to make informed decisions and exposes the broker to severe penalties. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes their fiduciary duties to their client above all else, while strictly adhering to the Arkansas Real Estate License Law and the Code of Ethics. This involves proactive communication, thorough market analysis, diligent marketing efforts, and absolute transparency in presenting all offers and material information to the client. When faced with competing interests, the broker must always act in a manner that is fair, honest, and in the best financial interest of the party they represent. Question 15. Examination of the data shows that a married couple in Arkansas is purchasing a residential property and has expressed a desire to own the property together, with the intention that if one spouse passes away, the surviving spouse will automatically inherit the deceased spouse's share without the need for probate. They are also interested in ensuring that each spouse has an equal and undivided interest in the property during their lifetime. Which of the following approaches best addresses their stated intentions in Arkansas property law? Option A. Explain the characteristics of joint tenancy with right of survivorship, emphasizing how it allows for automatic inheritance by the surviving spouse and ensures equal, undivided interests, and then recommend this structure if it aligns with their stated goals, advising them to consult with an Arkansas attorney to finalize the deed. Option B. Provide a general definition of fee simple ownership, stating it is the most complete form of ownership, and leave it to the couple to decide if this meets their specific inheritance and interest requirements. Option C. Describe tenancy in common, highlighting that each owner has an undivided interest but failing to mention the lack of automatic survivorship and the potential for shares to be willed to others, assuming this is what they want. Option D. Briefly outline leasehold estates, explaining that it involves renting property, and then suggest they consider this option if they are not looking for full ownership, without delving into the specifics of their stated inheritance desires. Correct answer is A. Explain the characteristics of joint tenancy with right of survivorship, emphasizing how it allows for automatic inheritance by the surviving spouse and ensures equal, undivided interests, and then recommend this structure if it aligns with their stated goals, advising them to consult with an Arkansas attorney to finalize the deed. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee to accurately advise clients on complex property ownership structures under Arkansas law, ensuring their decisions align with their intentions and legal implications. Misinterpreting or misrepresenting these ownership types can lead to significant legal disputes, financial losses for clients, and disciplinary action against the licensee. The licensee must demonstrate a thorough understanding of Arkansas's property law to guide clients effectively. The best approach involves clearly explaining the distinctions between fee simple, leasehold, joint tenancy, and tenancy in common, and then actively listening to the client's stated intentions and goals for the property. Based on this understanding, the licensee can then recommend the ownership structure that best aligns with their stated desires, providing examples of how each type functions in practice within Arkansas. This client-centric and legally informed method ensures that the clients make an educated decision that serves their long-term interests and complies with Arkansas statutes governing real property. An incorrect approach would be to assume the clients understand the nuances of each ownership type and simply present them with the definitions without further guidance or assessment of their needs. This fails to provide the necessary professional advice and places the burden of legal interpretation entirely on the clients, which is a dereliction of the licensee's duty to guide and inform. Another incorrect approach is to recommend a specific ownership type based on the licensee's personal preference or a perceived ease of transaction, without thoroughly understanding the client's objectives or the legal ramifications for their specific situation in Arkansas. This prioritizes expediency over client welfare and legal accuracy. Finally, an incorrect approach is to provide a superficial overview of each ownership type, focusing only on the most common aspects and neglecting to mention potential complexities or differences in how they are treated under Arkansas law, such as the right of survivorship in joint tenancy versus the undivided interest in tenancy in common. This lack of depth can lead to clients making decisions based on incomplete or misleading information. Professionals should approach such situations by first prioritizing client education and needs assessment. This involves active listening, clear communication of legal concepts in understandable terms, and then applying knowledge of Arkansas property law to recommend the most suitable options. When in doubt about complex legal implications, licensees should always advise clients to seek independent legal counsel from a qualified Arkansas attorney. Question 16. Research into a client's inquiry about purchasing a property in Little Rock, Arkansas, reveals a potential misunderstanding regarding what constitutes real estate. The client seems to believe that certain movable items within the house, such as high-end appliances and custom-built shelving units, are automatically included in the sale. As a licensed real estate professional in Arkansas, how should you best address this situation to ensure clarity and compliance with state regulations? Option A. Provide a general definition of real estate that focuses on the physical structure of the house and the land it sits on, without delving into the specifics of fixtures versus personal property. Option B. Explain that under Arkansas law, real estate encompasses land and anything permanently attached to it, including structures and fixtures, and that movable personal property is typically excluded unless specifically negotiated and itemized in the purchase agreement. Option C. Assume the client's understanding is correct and proceed with the transaction, advising them to clarify any specific items they are concerned about with the seller directly. Option D. Emphasize the importance of the property's market value and the overall investment potential, suggesting that the inclusion of specific items is a minor detail that can be resolved later. The correct answer is B. Explain that under Arkansas law, real estate encompasses land and anything permanently attached to it, including structures and fixtures, and that movable personal property is typically excluded unless specifically negotiated and itemized in the purchase agreement. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee in Arkansas to balance the legal definition of real estate with the practical expectations and potential misunderstandings of a client. The licensee must ensure the client understands what is included in the transaction and what is not, thereby preventing future disputes and upholding professional integrity. Careful judgment is required to communicate complex legal definitions in an accessible manner. The best approach involves clearly defining real estate according to Arkansas law, which includes land and anything permanently attached to it, such as buildings and fixtures. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the client's potential misconception by grounding the explanation in the legal framework governing real estate transactions in Arkansas. Adhering to the statutory definition ensures transparency and compliance with Arkansas Code Annotated Title 17, Chapter 70, which governs real estate licensing and practice. This proactive clarification prevents misunderstandings about what is being bought or sold, protecting both the client and the licensee from potential legal ramifications and ethical breaches related to misrepresentation or failure to disclose. An incorrect approach would be to assume the client's understanding of real estate aligns with common parlance, which might include personal property not permanently affixed to the land. This fails to uphold the licensee's duty to educate the client on the legal specifics of the transaction as defined by Arkansas law, potentially leading to disputes over what is included in the sale. Another incorrect approach would be to provide a vague definition that avoids specific legal terms, hoping to simplify the concept. This lacks the necessary precision and fails to inform the client about the exact scope of what constitutes real estate under Arkansas regulations, leaving room for misinterpretation and potential noncompliance with disclosure requirements. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the market value of the property without clarifying the legal definition of what constitutes the real estate itself. While market value is crucial, it does not address the fundamental understanding of the asset being transacted, which is the core of the client's initial inquiry and the licensee's responsibility to clarify. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes clear, legally accurate communication. This involves first identifying the client's underlying question or concern, then consulting the relevant state statutes and regulations. In this case, Arkansas Code Annotated Title 17, Chapter 70, and finally translating that legal information into understandable terms for the client. This process ensures that all parties have a shared and accurate understanding of the transaction scope, thereby fostering trust and preventing future issues. Question 17. Which approach would be most appropriate for an Arkansas real estate licensee representing a buyer interested in a property that borders a navigable river when the seller has historically used the riverbank for private access and recreation? Option A. Assume the buyer is aware of and understands riparian rights, and therefore no specific disclosure is necessary beyond the property description. Option B. Provide the buyer with a legal opinion on the exact scope and limitations of the riparian rights based on the licensee's understanding. Option C. Thoroughly research the extent of the seller's riparian rights, any public access easements, and clearly disclose all findings to the buyer. Option D. Focus only on the legal description of the land parcel in the deed and disregard any implications of the property's proximity to the navigable river. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly research the extent of the seller's riparian rights, any public access easements, and clearly disclose all findings to the buyer. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee in Arkansas to navigate the complexities of property rights and ownership, specifically concerning riparian rights, while acting in the best interest of their client. Misunderstanding or misrepresenting these rights can lead to significant legal disputes and financial losses for the buyer. Careful judgment is required to ensure all aspects of property ownership are accurately disclosed and understood. The best approach involves a thorough investigation and clear communication regarding the riparian rights associated with the property. This means actively researching the extent of the seller's riparian rights, understanding any potential limitations or public access easements, and ensuring this information is fully disclosed to the prospective buyer. This approach is correct because Arkansas law recognizes riparian rights for properties bordering navigable waters, and licensees have a duty under the Arkansas Real Estate License Law and Commission rules to disclose all material facts affecting the value or desirability of a property. Failing to do so constitutes a violation of their fiduciary duty and professional ethics. An approach that involves assuming the buyer understands riparian rights and therefore not actively investigating or disclosing them is professionally unacceptable. This failure to disclose material facts violates the licensee's duty to the client and the public, potentially leading to a breach of contract or misrepresentation claims. Another unacceptable approach is to provide a definitive legal opinion on the scope of the riparian rights without being qualified to do so. Real estate licensees are not attorneys, and offering legal advice constitutes the unauthorized practice of law, which is a violation of Arkansas law and professional conduct rules. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the physical boundaries of the property as described in the deed, without considering the associated water rights, is also professionally flawed. While the deed defines the land parcel, riparian rights are an incorporeal hereditament that significantly impact the property's use and value and must be addressed. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes due diligence, clear communication, and adherence to legal and ethical standards. This involves identifying potential complexities like riparian rights, conducting necessary research, or advising the client to seek expert legal counsel, and ensuring all material information is transparently shared with the client and prospective buyers. Question 18. Governance review demonstrates that a real estate agent in Little Rock, Arkansas, is representing a seller whose property has received an offer from a prospective buyer. During a conversation with the seller expresses concern that the prospective buyer, who has young children, might lead to increased noise and activity in their otherwise quiet neighborhood. The agent needs to advise the seller on how to proceed with the offer. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Arkansas's Fair Housing Act and anti-discrimination regulations? Option A. Recommend that the seller consider the prospective buyer's religion when deciding whether to accept the offer, as it might influence their integration into the existing community. Option B. Inform the seller that the prospective buyer's national origin could potentially lead to future demographic shifts in the neighborhood that might not align with the seller's preferences. Option C. Advise the seller to evaluate the offer based solely on its financial terms, the buyer's ability to close, and any contingencies, without discussing or considering the prospective buyer's familial status or any perceived impact on the neighborhood. Option D. Suggest to the seller that they might want to reject the offer to maintain the current quiet atmosphere of the neighborhood, subtly implying the prospective buyer's children would disrupt this. Correct answer is C. Advise the seller to evaluate the offer based solely on its financial terms, the buyer's ability to close, and any contingencies, without discussing or considering the prospective buyer's familial status or any perceived impact on the neighborhood. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate professional to navigate a delicate situation involving a potential client's personal characteristics, which are protected under fair housing laws, while simultaneously attempting to secure a listing. The agent must balance their business objective with their legal and ethical obligations to avoid any appearance or reality of discrimination. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are compliant and uphold the principles of equal housing opportunity. The best professional approach involves focusing solely on the property's merits and the seller's stated objectives for selling, without any reference to or consideration of the protected characteristics of the prospective buyer. This approach directly adheres to the principles of the Fair Housing Act of 1968, as amended, and Arkansas's own fair housing regulations, which prohibit discrimination in the sale or rental of housing based on race, color, religion, sex, familial status, national origin, or disability. By treating all potential buyers equally and focusing on objective property and market factors, the agent avoids any potential for discriminatory practice or perception. An incorrect approach would be to subtly steer the seller towards rejecting the offer based on the prospective buyer's familial status, even if framed as protecting the seller's quiet enjoyment of the neighborhood. This constitutes steering, a violation of fair housing laws, as it attempts to influence the seller's decision based on a protected characteristic of the buyer. Another incorrect approach would be to inform the seller that the prospective buyer's national origin might lead to future neighborhood integration issues, which is a clear act of discrimination and a violation of fair housing statutes. Finally, suggesting to the seller that they should consider the prospective buyer's religion when evaluating the offer, even if presented as a concern about community compatibility, is also a direct contravention of fair housing laws. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to fair housing laws above all else. This involves actively recognizing protected characteristics, understanding that any consideration or action based on these characteristics is illegal and unethical, and focusing all professional interactions on objective, non-discriminatory factors related to the property and the transaction. When faced with a situation that could potentially involve protected characteristics, the professional's primary duty is to ensure equal treatment and opportunity for all parties involved, regardless of their background. Question 19. The evaluation methodology shows that a real estate broker in Arkansas is assisting a landlord in drafting a lease agreement for a residential property. The landlord expresses a desire for the lease to be for 1 year, with the option for the tenant to renew for an additional year under the same terms, provided the tenant gives 60 days notice before the initial lease expires. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with Arkansas regulations and professional standards for lease agreements? Option A. Verbally inform the tenant that the lease is for 1 year and that renewal is possible for another year if they give notice, without including specific details in the written lease. Option B. State in the lease that the tenant has the option to renew for another year, without specifying the notice period or the exact terms of the renewal. Option C. Include a clause stating the lease is for 1 year and will automatically renew on a month-to-month basis if the tenant does not provide notice of termination. Option D. Clearly stipulate the 1-year lease term and explicitly detail the tenant's right to renew for an additional year, including the requirement for 60 days written notice prior to the expiration of the initial term within the written lease agreement. Correct answer is D. Clearly stipulate the 1-year lease term and explicitly detail the tenant's right to renew for an additional year, including the requirement for 60 days written notice prior to the expiration of the initial term within the written lease agreement. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that understanding the nuances of lease agreements is critical for real estate professionals in Arkansas. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a broker to balance the client's immediate desires with the legal and ethical obligations imposed by Arkansas law and professional standards. Misinterpreting or misapplying lease terms can lead to disputes, financial losses, and regulatory sanctions. Careful judgment is required to ensure all agreements are legally sound, transparent, and in the best interest of all parties involved. The correct approach involves clearly defining the lease term and any renewal options in writing, ensuring both parties understand the duration of the agreement and the conditions under which it can be extended. This aligns with Arkansas Code Annotated Section 18-16-101, et sec., which governs landlord and tenant relations and emphasizes the importance of written agreements for clarity and enforceability. Specifically, the Arkansas Real Estate Commission, AREC, mandates that all material terms, including lease duration and renewal provisions, must be in writing and clearly communicated to avoid misunderstandings and potential legal challenges. This approach ensures compliance, protects both the landlord and tenant, and upholds professional integrity. An incorrect approach would be to verbally agree to a renewal term without documenting it in the lease agreement. This is professionally unacceptable because verbal agreements regarding real estate leases are difficult to prove and enforce in Arkansas, potentially leading to disputes over the lease's end date and renewal conditions. It violates the principle of clear and transparent communication and the AREC requirement for written documentation of all material terms. Another incorrect approach would be to assume a lease automatically renews on a month-to-month basis if not terminated, without explicitly stating this in the original lease. While some jurisdictions have default provisions, Arkansas law generally requires explicit agreement for lease terms, including renewals. Relying on an assumed default without clear contractual language can lead to tenant disputes and landlord liability. This fails to provide the certainty and clarity required by law and professional practice. A further incorrect approach would be to include vague language about renewal possibilities without specifying the notice period or terms of renewal. Vague terms create ambiguity, which is detrimental in legal contracts. Arkansas law and AREC guidelines emphasize specificity in lease agreements to prevent disputes and ensure all parties are fully informed of their rights and obligations. Such vagueness undermines the purpose of a written lease and exposes all parties to potential legal complications. The professional reasoning framework for such situations involves prioritizing clear, written communication and strict adherence to Arkansas real estate law and AREC regulation. Professionals must always ensure that all lease terms, especially those concerning duration and renewal, are explicitly stated in writing and understood by all parties. When in doubt, seeking clarification from legal counsel or consulting the AREC guidelines is paramount to maintaining ethical and legal compliance. Question 20. The audit findings indicate that a real estate broker in Arkansas, representing the seller of a commercial property, failed to adequately address potential environmental contamination identified during a preliminary site assessment. The assessment suggested the possibility of underground storage tank UST leakage, with estimated remediation costs ranging from $50,000 to $150,000. The broker, aiming to expedite the sale, informed the buyer that remediation would likely cost around $60,000 based on a quick internal estimate, and proceeded with the sale without further professional environmental consultation or detailed disclosure of the full potential cost range. The buyer later discovered the actual remediation costs exceeded $130,000 Which of the following actions best reflects compliance with Arkansas environmental disclosure regulations and professional ethical standards in this scenario? Option A. The broker should have relied on their internal estimate of $60,000, as this was a reasonable approximation, and informed the buyer that any costs exceeding this amount would be the buyer's responsibility post-closing. Option B. The broker should have advised the seller to perform the remediation before listing the property, and if the seller refused, the broker should have withdrawn from representing the seller due to the potential liability. Option C. The broker should have simply stated in the listing agreement that the property was sold, as is, with respect to environmental conditions, thereby absolving themselves of any disclosure obligations regarding potential contamination. Option D. The broker should have obtained a detailed Phase II environmental site assessment, disclosed the full potential remediation cost range, $50,000 to $150,000 to the buyer, and facilitated negotiations between the buyer and seller regarding responsibility for these costs, potentially through an escrow agreement for remediation. The correct answer is D. The broker should have obtained a detailed Phase II environmental site assessment, disclosed the full potential remediation cost range, $50,000 to $150,000 to the buyer, and facilitated negotiations between the buyer and seller regarding responsibility for these costs, potentially through an escrow agreement for remediation. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential issue with a property transaction in Arkansas concerning environmental disclosures. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker to balance their fiduciary duty to the client with strict adherence to Arkansas environmental disclosure laws and ethical obligations. Misinterpreting or neglecting these regulations can lead to significant legal liabilities, financial penalties, and damage to professional reputation. The broker must possess a thorough understanding of the Arkansas real estate license law and any applicable environmental statutes to ensure compliance and protect all parties involved. The best approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure process, accurately calculating and documenting any potential environmental remediation costs based on expert assessments. This aligns with the Arkansas real estate license law's emphasis on honesty, integrity, and full disclosure of material facts. By obtaining professional environmental assessments and clearly communicating the findings and associated costs to both buyer and seller, the broker fulfills their legal and ethical obligations. This approach ensures that all parties are making informed decisions based on accurate information regarding the property's environmental condition and the financial implications thereof. An incorrect approach would be to estimate remediation costs without professional consultation, potentially underestimating the true expense and misleading the buyer. This violates the duty of full disclosure and could lead to future disputes and legal action. Another incorrect approach is to omit any mention of potential environmental concerns, even if not explicitly mandated by law for every property type, if such concerns are reasonably discoverable and could materially affect the property's value or desirability. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to act with integrity. Finally, attempting to shift the burden of environmental assessment solely onto the buyer without providing any preliminary information or guidance also falls short, as it fails to uphold the broker's responsibility to facilitate a transparent and informed transaction. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, accuracy, and compliance. This involves staying current with Arkansas environmental regulations, consulting with qualified environmental professionals when necessary, and meticulously documenting all disclosures and communications. When faced with potential environmental issues, brokers should err on the side of over-disclosure and seek expert advice to ensure all material facts are presented to clients.